Okay, so recently I picked up the Tone King Imperial preamp pedal, and if you haven't seen that video, I'll link to it here. But what I wanted to do was compare the tones from that preamp pedal with some of my favorite Tone King captures from Amalgam on the Quad Cortex. I wanted to compare kind of, one, how they sounded, but also how they felt in terms of, with the hands-on guitar. So let's talk about how I have the cabling set up between the two devices. My guitar cable is running into the Tone King preamp. And then if you're not familiar with that preamp, it has the ability to do kind of a 4-cable method, meaning you can use the preamp channels in the pedal with an amp that has an effects loop, or you can just defer to that amp so that you can just add those preamp channels to another amp. In this case, what I'm doing is I'm using that functionality to either use the preamp pedal or to do an output to the Quad Cortex. So what I'm doing is I'm running the guitar into the input of the preamp pedal, and then the output on the preamp pedal that's supposed to go to the front of an amp, I'm sending to input 1 on the Quad Cortex, and then the output from the pedal is going to input 2 on the Quad Cortex. And if we look at the preset I've got up here, you can see then I've got them set up for input 1 going into the captures, and input 2, I'm going through a low-high cut just to keep things even, and then I'm keeping the reverb the same. So I'm not going to use the reverb on the preamp pedal. I'm just going to use a little bit of reverb on the Quad Cortex to keep the sounds similar. And the other thing I'm doing is on the Quad Cortex, I'm sending a MIDI signal to the preamp pedal to trigger the bypass. So when I'm going to these scenes, I'm sending a MIDI signal to turn the bypass off. And when I'm on these scenes, it sends the signal to the preamp pedal to turn the bypass on. So you'll notice when I'm playing on these scenes, see how the input light is going off because it's not, the noise gate's not engaged because I'm playing. If I switch it, you can hear that's coming through input 2. So that's our setup. And I've got 4 main tones I want to test, although for the edge of Breakup, I have 2 different versions. So for the clean tone, I'm using the rhythm channel clean, the warm, and we're going to look at these settings in the document that Amalgam gives us so we can try to match the settings exactly. For the edge, I've got an edge that's the rhythm channel and an edge that's the lead channel. And then for the crunch and lead, we're using the lead channel. So before we jump in, I have to do the obligatory. Please hit the like. Please maybe leave a comment. Those kinds of things really help the analytics on small channels like mine and helps them get kind of a wider distribution from YouTube. If you like these kind of videos, consider subscribing. And there's a Sweetwater affiliate link in the description below if you're interested in buying the Quad Cortex or the Tone King Imperial preamp pedal. So let's start off with the clean. And I'm going to bring up the document from Amalgam. And if you see here, we can look at the settings. So for the clean warm, which is the one I'm using, we've got volume on 4, treble on 5, bass on 4. So that's how I've got the pedal set up as well. And the other thing I'll mention is we're using the exact same IRs. So the IR I'm using is a Fender 2x12 from Amalgam. That's one of my favorite IRs. And I'm using that exact same IR loaded onto the Tone King pedal. So it's the same IR. It's running in 2 different places, so that may make a difference. But we're using the same exact IR file. And like I said, the reverb is coming from the Quad Cortex. Just a little bit of reverb, not too much. And I've got the delay turned off with the Quad Cortex. So let's go ahead and hear what it sounds like. So here's the clean. Again, this is the clean warm. If I go to the pedal, so I can already hear a couple of things. It feels like the capture from Amalgam maybe has a little more gain on it. And obviously too, the Tone King preamp pedal feels a little darker. I will say on the preamp pedal, I've got the attenuation at max, meaning it's attenuating the least it can, so the volume's the max. So we shouldn't be losing any treble there. But I'm going to go ahead and make a couple adjustments on the Tone King preamp pedal. So what I did here is I dropped the bass on the preamp pedal from 4 to 3, and I've raised the treble from 5 to 6. And I also increased the volume or the gain from 4 to 4.5. Let's hear how that sounds. Let's compare it to the Quad Cortex. You can hear the capture still sounds a little brighter and maybe has a little more gain. So I would probably raise the gain from 4.5 maybe to 5 or even 5.5, and then push the treble a little bit more too. Okay, so now I've got the gain at 5.5 and treble's at 7. Bass is still on 3. So again, here's the Quad Cortex. And here's the Tone King pedal. Go back to the Quad Cortex. So now they sound very, very similar. Maybe there's still a little bit more grit in the capture, but I mean, tonally, I think they sound very similar now. So, I mean, that says to me that at least on the rhythm channel, on the Tone King pedal, it's a little bit darker than what we get from the captures. So let's go ahead and move to Edge of Breakup. And we're going to start with the rhythm channel edge of Breakup. So let's look at the settings for that one. So for the rhythm channel edge, we're on the balanced, so we want volume at 6, treble at 7.5, bass at 3. Now, we already know that the pedal maybe has a little less gain than the captures, so I'm going to go to 6.5 on the volume. I'll keep the treble at 7.5, and the bass, maybe it'll be 2.5. Because the other thing I noticed on the pedal is as you drive the gain, the bass gets a little more up front. So let's check them out. Here's the capture. And here's the pedal. So we can hear then there's still more kind of low-end thump coming from the pedal. And actually, I like it. It adds a little more beef to the tone. So here, the capture sounds even like a little bit thin. So I'm definitely hearing kind of more fullness and punch from the preamp pedal. Let's go ahead and switch the capture to the lead channel capture. So here we're using the lead channel edge warm. If we go look at that setting, so the edge warm is volumes at 6, tones at 6.5, mid bite is at 3. So let's set that on our preamp pedal. Okay, so the other thing I'll say before we get into this is on the Tone King preamp pedal, on the lead channel, it tends to be a lot louder. So there is some attenuation going on. So I have the attenuation set to about 6, meaning we're cutting off a little less than half of the volume with the attenuation. So let's hear the Quad Cortex. And here's the Tone King pedal. Again, more low-end thump going on there. So what I might do is raise up the tone a little bit, maybe from 6.5 to 7 or 7.5. Let's try that. Let's go back to the Wuad Cortex. So there's still kind of more low-end push from the preamp pedal, but they sound pretty similar. And there might be a little more gain on the preamp pedal. Let me lower that just a little bit. So we're at about a little over 5 rather than at 6. Yeah, I think that's closer. So interesting. On the rhythm channel, it seems like the preamp pedal had a little less gain than the captures. On the lead channel, it seems a little bit the opposite. It has a little more gain than the capture has. So interesting. But again, you can get them to sound pretty similar. Let's go ahead and move to the crunch. So we're using the lead crunch balanced. So if we go look what that looks like. So crunch balanced, 7.5, 7.5 on the tone, and bite is 2.5. So knowing the pedal has a little more gain on the lead channel, let's go ahead and go volume at 7, and maybe we'll push the tone to 8. So let's try on the captures. And here's the preamp pedal. So you can hear, again, there's more low end here. Now, of course, if we wanted to, we could push the bass on the capture a little bit. And that brings it pretty close. Yeah, that brings it pretty close. So again, a little compensating going on, but generally they sound pretty similar, which you would hope that they would. And if we go to our last one here, so now this one is the lead warm, but this is boosted. So this one I'm using is boosted, and I think instead what we're going to do is we're going to use the dimed. So we're just going to go to the highest gain we can here with the volume on 9, because we don't have a boost pedal. So they created the capture with a boost pedal in front of the amp. I'm not going to do that here today, so we're just going to go to the dime. So let me switch volume 9, tone 9, bite 7.5. Here's the Tone King pedal. So again, it sounds a little darker. I'm going to push the tone just a little bit. I've got the tone maxed out with as much treble as I can give it. So a lot more top end here. Maybe pull this top end a little bit down. We know, push the bass just a little bit. So interesting comparison. So what did we learn? So one, we learned that with a little bit of tweaking, you can't get them to sound exactly the same, which I think is a good thing. That means that the captures were made, off the amp well, and they represent how the amp sounds. And the same thing with the preamp pedal. It's sounding like the Tonking Imperial amp, which is one thing to remember. These captures were not made from the Tonking Imperial preamp pedal. They were made from the real amp. So the fact that we can get them both sounding about the same means that both of them are representing the amp well. The second thing is, on the rhythm channel, it seems like the gain in the preamp is a little bit less than you're getting on the captures. So there's some tweaking there. It also feels like it's a darker tone from the preamp pedal, which is something that I've heard and seen in some of the reviews that I've done. And also I've experienced this. It's a pretty bass heavy sound, especially on the rhythm channel. And a lot of times you've got to drop that bass quite a bit, even to the point of turning it all the way as far down as it'll go. So I'm not surprised that the rhythm channel is a little bass heavy, a little dark compared to the captures. On the lead channel, it seems like the preamp pedal has even maybe a little more gain than is in the captures. So got to turn that volume a little bit down. And it seems like the EQ is pretty much the same, but there's kind of more low end on it. So you got to tweak that a little bit. So overall, I was happy to find that the tones sound very similar. And to me, that speaks that they're both representing the actual Tonking Imperial amp really well. And I think in terms of feel, I know you can't hear this as coming across, but they feel pretty much the same. I don't know that I'm feeling any significant difference between the two. Anyway, I hope you found this comparison as interesting as I did. And as always, thanks for watching.